There's a man in New York, in downtown Manhattan. He sells hot dogs. And he's been selling hot dogs for decades. And he has seen so many people. He has seen them all types, all walks of life. But there's one man that walks past him, never buys a hot dog. He has a briefcase, he has a suit, he has a tie. And all he does, he walks past them and he goes like this. Every day, the same time. He goes back from the work. Same again. Hey, what's this guy about? And he can't help himself. One day he says to him, hey, my man, I'm so sorry. Can I ask you something? Do you mind? The man said, sure, fine, ask. He said, you know, I'm the man from the hot dog. He said, yes, I know, but I don't like hot dogs. He said, no, that's all right. That's all right. I just have to know. I just have to ask. I see you every day and you do this. He said, yes, I know. He said, could you tell me why do you do that? He said, oh, to keep the lions away. He said, lions? My man, this is downtown Manhattan. There ain't no lions here. You see? It works. It works. Question. Is the absence of evidence of absence? Let the one sink in for a bit. You understand? So how can I know? How can I know there is a God? Now, I'm a Christian, obviously. And I'm a Christian because I am a skeptic. That's all I can tell you. I need solid, verifiable, rock-solid proof. I love facts. Hey, if I have to change my lifestyle, would I take on board someone telling me how to live? It better be good. It better be right. And I don't mind the reward on the end either. And that's the way we are. So let me take you here on a journey. And so, I hope this. When we look at our planet, it is quite a consideration. The Milky Way is our galaxy. It's only one of 500,000 galaxies that we are perhaps aware of. It's a little blue dot somewhere in the universe. And it is occupied by Homo sapiens, which is really the Latin name for the species of us, the human beings. And we don't seem to get along terribly well. We just seem to have this habit of fighting, arguing, and there's of course a maldistribution of resources as well. It's a terrible thing, and that is basically what this planet is, and what is it indeed all about. Now, let me start with this, a couple of understandings. Firstly, I'll take you back some 2,500 years. A prophecy of the world's history for 2,500 years will be delivered to you here tonight. There are some 12 lines in a particular book in the Bible, and it outlines a history of in excess of just 2,500 years. And you will recognize it. A prophecy of the world's history from 2,500 years ago until the end of time. Now, first a couple of rules. What is a prophet? A prophet is an individual, and we got to get this straight, who is claimed to have been contacted by the supernatural or the divine. In other words, someone who believes he or she is endowed with a message, an obligation to pass on a message. And that person would claim to speak for them. That is the deities, whatever you like to call it. Serving as an intermediate between delivering a message, of course, and being the intermediate between the divine and humanity. There are two main types of prophecy. There is the classical one, that's a short term. Now, if you turn to the Bible, the prophet would go to the people and he would say to the people, unless you change, this will happen, that will happen. Now, that could happen next week, next year, or within a given lifespan. That is a short-term prophecy, a short-range prophecy, as opposed to the apocalyptic, which means apocalyptic means revealing. That is a prophecy that can be stretched over thousands of years, which is the one we're going to look at tonight. That's what we're dealing with. There is another distinction. The classical prophecy is a conditional prophecy. Do this, and this will happen. Don't do it, and that may not happen. Do you understand? There is a condition. Well, the one that we have tonight here for you, the other one is the apocalyptic one. It is an unconditional prophecy because it just gives you the outline what is going to happen. And so, here are some of the conditions. You ever met somebody who claimed to be a prophet? Oh, in my line of work, I come across a few of them. I have another word for them, but that's okay. They're confused. They're confused. The prophecy must be specific, it must be accurate, it must have chronology, it must have an order of events, and it has to be right. Predicted events must occur in the future, because you can't make a prophecy of the past. If you report on the past, you are a historian. If you comment on current events, you are a reporter. What you say must be in the good. Predicted events must occur in the future. Now, as we study these prophecies, we've got to look at history for events before they would occur. Have they occurred indeed? And can I verify that? Because if I can't, what is the point of a prophecy? What is important? The time of the prophecy must be known. You have to be able to verify when that prophecy was given. Are you all with me here? If this gets too warm, we can turn it on cold. No? Okay, that's all right. Just in case you get sleepy. Okay. The book of Daniel, written in the 6th century BC. Daniel, the name. Dan in Hebrew is judge. Dani means my judge. El is the singular form of Elohim. And so we have God is my judge. That's what his name means. And I would say that he would have written this in the middle of the 6th century. That is about 550s, 560s BC. He would have recorded everything. There are 4 successive empires that would rule. And Daniel was in the first, and he survived the transition to the second. We'll come back to that another time. What is interesting, 3 of them are mentioned by name. Number 4 is described accurately. Identification is no problem. And I don't know any commentators or historici who do. It predicted the political state, and that's what fascinates me. It has predicted already then. Written over 2,500 years ago, it predicted the current status of Europe, which we will talk about more extensively in other presentations. Nebuchadnezzar is the one that is the center figure here. He's actually Nebuchadnezzar II. He is the son of Nabopolassar, an Assyrian general who rebelled against his Assyrian overlords, and with the Medes they flattened the city of Nineveh in 612 BC. And this man took over from his dad, and he was a brilliant ruler. Absolutely brilliant. The city of Babylon, one day I'll give you the details. It was incredible. It still would demand the respect of architects and engineers today. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Let's get straight into it. And it really upset him because they believed that dreams mean something and that could be true. And so his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. The problem was he would wake up in the morning and he would know that he had been dreaming. But he had one tiny little bit of a problem. He couldn't remember the dream. This is very pivotal. His sleep left him. Now, so he calls the magicians, he calls the astrologers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, an ancient wise people in that district, to come to explain. He wants answers. And so, these were the clever dicks of the day. There they are. And he demands an explanation. And they say, "O king, live forever." These were crawlers. "Tell your servants the dream and we'll give the interpretation." Now let me explain something to you what they would do. What they would do is, "Oh yes. Oh yes, we know what it means." And they put it right into the future, way beyond their retirement age. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, good one. The trouble is, this king was not born yesterday. The king did not remember the dream. That's bad. And he now deals with it this way. There is the carrot and the stick. Let me show you what the carrot is. He says, "Make known the dream, and if you shall receive gifts, rewards, and great honor." That's nice. Here is the stick. If not, no unfair dismissal laws in that. No appeals court. You couldn't go anywhere. He was the high court of the country. And that's it. They have been feeding off him. He has maintained them. Now perform. That's what he wants. Now, tell me the dream. It's not a request. It's an order. Tell me the dream and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. In other words, if you claim special gifts, come up with the goods. And I'll believe the interpretation. You understand? There is no man, they said, who can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. What they are saying to this king, this is unfair. That was a stupid thing to say. Very stupid. The king was very angry and he made a decision. He gave command to destroy all the wise men in Babylon. The lot of them. Get rid of them. Cut back. Worse than Qantas. Get rid of them. For this reason the king was angry. He gave command to destroy all the wise men from Babylon. And that brings us to the man, young man, 19 years of age, perhaps even 18, 20. Who was taken prisoner some years before from Judea, from Jerusalem. He belonged to the royal line of kings of Judah, and him and his friends were there for re-education purposes, and they were classified as the wise men. And so, unfortunately, whilst he was not there, he is to be rounded up as well, and he was going to be history too. And so, you'll find this very interesting scenario. God reveals the dream, and he has a special way to go about it. Now, Daniel makes a request. He wants a delay. If somebody came to kill you, you would like some delay as well. Preferably about 30 years. Daniel and his friends turn to God. They have a prayer meeting. And you know what? Prayer meetings work. Daniel receives a night vision. Now what fascinates me about this man, he has a day to come up with the goods. If he doesn't, he's gone. He goes to bed, they have a prayer meeting, all good, and then he goes to sleep. How good would you be? Tomorrow was your no, that's right. It could keep you awake. What would you do? Watch television? Well, they weren't there. Of course you don't. Okay. Daniel receives a night vision. He recalls the dream, unlike the king. He recalls the dream and he appears before Nebuchadnezzar because he knows he has prayed for the fact that God might reveal to him in the dream. And he dreams the same dream. He knows it. He goes before the king. There is no fear in this young man. What a guy. What a guy. Now, let's have a look. He appears before Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel confirms the inability of the wise men. He said, indeed, they can't do it. Daniel presents his God as the revealer. He does not claim capacity. Daniel expresses the king's concerns. What were his concerns? What was on his mind? He was worried what would happen after he had gone with the empire. Would it last forever? Which is what he wanted. His legacy. Ego. Now, that the king could recall immediately. But not only that, Daniel starts telling the dream. He reveals the dream, and Nebuchadnezzar accepts the dream. In other words, have you ever had a dream and you woke up and you forgot about it? And then something happens during the day and plunk, it's there. That young man stands before him and he tells him in detail exactly what he was dreaming. Well, he sits there and he's flabbergasted. How often would that happen to you, that someone else tells you what you did dream? Well, that is what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel proceeds with the interpretation. The king said, if you can tell me what dream I had, you can give the interpretation. And so that's what he does. That's what he does. And Nebuchadnezzar accepts Daniel's interpretation. Daniel receives a reward, of course. He acknowledges Daniel's God as the revealer of secrets. Can I tell you that the book of Daniel, of which we find excerpts in the Dead Sea Scrolls of all chapters, and I've viewed them, they're very interesting. They're there. There is one chapter that he didn't write. I thought you were going to get me a bit of water, Cobb. There he goes. He goes and gets some water, sits down, helps himself. What about me? I'm only warming up now. Okay. Now, what is interesting, this man, Nebuchadnezzar, actually wrote one chapter. The only chapter in the whole of the Old Testament ever written by a pagan. Did you know he became a true believer in the true God? Great story. Man, what a story. Anyway, you, O king, this is the dream. Oh, mate. Cup of tea would have been better, I think. Oh, I like a cup of tea at this time of the night. Okay. Now, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. Now, images are meaningful for these people. A great image, he says, this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you. In fact, he says its form was awesome. It truly made an impression on this king. This image head was of fine gold. Note the metals. Its chest was of silver. I want you to have a look at the next one. Its belly and thighs are of... We're going down in price, aren't we? Then he continues, he says, its legs were of iron. And then it gets even worse, its feet partly of iron and clay. Now it gets really cheap and nasty. That's what he describes. Then he says, you watched whilst a stone was cut out without hands. Now that is interesting. The one thing that you must see here, whilst that little animation I spent 5 minutes on, without hands. In other words, it is a supernatural occurrence. It is not a human device. It is not anything perpetrated by humanity. This is supernatural. He said, without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron clay and broke them in pieces. Now, I want you to remember this. Where did it strike? Okay, which were made of? Okay, very good. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together. Apparently, it totally destroyed that particular image. Have a look at it. Became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. How many of you would know what that means? How many of you would know what a threshing floor is? Yeah, tell me. Right. So you get the harvest of the wheat or the barley, whatever it is. You get the animals to walk over it, or you roll something over it, or you thresh it like that. And you got to be on a high place, on a hill, when the wind is there. And you take a winnowing fork and you throw it up, and the wind carries away the chaff that has no nutrition. Who wants to eat it anyway? You just want the kernels that are valuable, and they are your food. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So, in other words, it was all blown away. There was nothing left. There was nothing left of the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron. It was all gone because of that stone. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. Now, the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. It filled the whole earth. And then, this is the dream. He's not saying, now, Sarah, does that ring a bell? He doesn't. That's it. And he straight away goes into the interpretation. Now, we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. I'm going to tell you. You, O king, are king of kings. Nice. But he's not crawling. He says, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Now, he thought he did it all himself. Daniel says, no, God gave it to you. Nice. And so you are this head of gold. Now, this is Babylon. Babylon of about 605, 606 BC to 539 BC. It's only not even 70 years that it existed. But the splendor of Babylon, fantastic. That city was incredible. You are the head of gold. He personified Babylon. He ruled for 43 years, Nebuchadnezzar. The ones after him were nothing like him. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you. So here's answer to his thinking and question. He is saying, no, your kingdom is not going to last forever. There's going to be another one. And from 539 to 331 BC, for 200 years, you have the Medo-Persian. That's a matter of history under Cyrus the Great. Brilliant tactician. And I'm going to give you a biblical account that is so hair-raising, that is so undeniably so incredible. That was the one that really got me. Another time I'll deal with that one. What happened? Do you know the Bible predicted 160 years before that event how it would happen? 100 years before Cyrus was born, he was named. Isaiah, he was named. And the reason for his naming and telling him how he would do it would be the evidence to Cyrus that he should let God's people who were in exile, he should let them go. And you know what? He did. He did. Fascinating. You know, I told you I'm a skeptic. I got to tell you a story. I have another head. I'm a physiotherapist by profession. And I work in this medical center, and there's this radiologist. And he says, you know, I went to this college here, and it was run by Seventh-day Adventists. I said, oh, was it? He said, yeah. He said, you know, they tell you these prophecies. He said, now you be careful now. He said, what religion are you? He came from South India. I didn't think he could get any darker, but he did. I just have to tell you. I always think of him. And actually, he was a Muslim, and we became very good friends. He was good. He was all right. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. It was inferior, though it lasted longer. And then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. It's interesting. The Medo-Persians had silver in their weaponry. The typical weaponry of the Grecians contained bronze. Their shields were solid bronze. Which shall rule over all the earth. Now you remember Alexander the Great? Do you know that the Bible has a lot to say about Alexander the Great? I'm going to prove to you in the course of these sessions, I'm going to prove to you that the Bible has to be inspired, because what they said about Alexander the Great, you wouldn't believe until you read it in black and white. And I will prove to you that it was given well before the events. You may go to the internet and you have people who say, oh yes. Daniel reported it after the events. No, no, no. Jesus, in Matthew 24, refers to Daniel the prophet. If Daniel was talking about the past, he would have said Daniel the historian. But he didn't. If you examine the Dead Sea Scrolls and you consider the grammar and the syntax of the grammar, you know that that is ancient writing, at least a First Temple period or thereabouts grammar. And it is undeniable, just a fantasy to say there was a 2nd century BC Daniel that recorded this. This is a load of rubbish. And I've had my arguments about that with people. I have no problem dealing with it if ever you want me to deal with it in detail. Now, the 4th kingdom shall be as strong as iron. After Greece, there was another kingdom. Now, of course, this is Rome, history tells us, which ruled the then known world for some amazing 6 centuries. It's quite incredible. Quite incredible. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, we go to the lower part, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. We are after the year 476 AD. Why do I say that? Well, in 476 AD, the Heruli under Odoacer invaded Rome and took possession of Rome, deposed the last emperor, even though there were some subsequent ones. Rome was broken. Rome was falling apart. Study the decline and fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbons. It's a fantastic account. It's split up in 3 parts before that. Byzantine Rome or Eastern Rome or Greek Rome. There at Constantinople survived for almost 1,000 years in a diminished capacity. And Carthage, of course, fell fairly shortly after. That's another story, and we'll deal with it again. What we have here, when Rome fell apart, there was no other power that took it over. It just simply fell apart. Nobody succeeded. Nobody succeeded. The kingdom shall be divided, and in fact will remain divided. The strength of iron, the strength of Rome at times, what it used to be, will be in it. That is true. But just as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay. Now, how well would ceramic clay mix with iron? No, not very well at all. You're so right. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron, partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, partly fragile. Notice, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of man. He predicts intermarriage. But they will not cleave one to another. That text must be imprinted upon your mind. It is one of the most powerful statements made more than 2,500 years ago. And it has withstood the test of time, and it is still valid till our day. They will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with... Well, that's fantastic. Clear. Just a recap. Babylon, gold. Medo-Persia, silver. Greece, bronze. Rome, Imperial Rome, iron. And then we get to the history 476 AD, as we know it. Let's look at Charlemagne. He spent 50 years trying to reunite Europe into a Roman Empire. But his 4 sons fought about things, and there was the meeting there in Verdun, and the next one in Cologne, and then they split up the lot, and it was again divided. Never reached any unification. Charles the Great couldn't do it. Charles V tried so hard of Spain, the golden era of Spain, when they conquered just about the whole of Europe, but never completely all of Europe. Philip II, his son, tried so hard. Have a look at this guy, Louis the 14th. He ruled for some 72 years. That's long. I thought John Howard was long, but he was worse. Yeah? Okay, so tens of thousands of soldiers died under his rule. You want to study that era. It is absolutely incredible. He was only a little bloke. Here's another little bloke, the petit corporal, the Frenchman would say, the little corporal. But man, he had a personality, this guy. I want to talk about Napoleon a bit. I want to talk about Napoleon. You see, Napoleon made a mistake in June 1812. You know what that mistake was? He went into Russia. Man, he should have never done it. 3 years later, he meets his Waterloo. Had he not gone into Russia? ... You know, there's something interesting. He actually should have won. There's a little place called Quatre Bras there in Belgium. Means 4 arms. There's a little museum. And they've got all the details of the Battle of Waterloo. Blücher was here with this, and then there was Lord Wellington over there, and this is Napoleon. Napoleon, when they feed all the information of the cavalry and everything else and into the computer says Napoleon must win. But he lost. The one thing that Napoleon didn't count on, and neither does the computer, was the fact of the rain. The reinforcement he counted on for the critical moment came too late, and he lost the battle. And he is on the record as raising his fist to heaven, and he says, "You, O God, have been too much for me." That's a fact. He believed in God. He was not a Christian. So that is about Napoleon. One code, the Napoleonic code. He almost did it, but he never got England. Never got England. Never did. As you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of man. This tapestry, there's a tapestry in Frederiksborg Castle in Denmark. And it is fantastic when you look at the relationships of Queen Victoria with all the ruling juntas everywhere over Europe. She had about 40 connections amongst royalty. Cousins, nephews, uncles. Do you know, the reality is that World War I, the most obscene behavior of mankind, was really a family feud. That's all it was. And I get angry when you look at the lives. What was the purpose? What was the meaning? Why? These men should have seen their kids grow up, or at least have them. What a waste of human life. You know, just because of a family feud. And ambitions. Here he is, Kaiser Wilhelm. Wilhelm II, actually. It's interesting, he ruled from that time as the last monarch of Germany. There's something very interesting about him. You want to stay right awake for this. Have a look. That was World War I. And the common man in the street was used for cannon fodder. It was brutal. The trenches, it was terrible. Now, look at this castle here. That one is in a place called Doorn in Utrecht. That is Holland. I know the place. I know the place. Visited every year by Germans who still support the monarchy. Of course, they're gone. Because the emperor had to abdicate, and he did. For 20 years before he died on the 4th of June 1941. There's something very interesting that I want to tell you. It is absolutely true. And I'm going to give you an introduction to what I'm going to tell you about. This is the cathedral in Metz. Metz was now northern France, but it used to be part of Germany. Now, during World War I, that cathedral was actually damaged. It was actually damaged. And what happened? Cup of tea? No, they look after me. I want some tea. No, it's all right. Look at all the statues. They're all prophets. Amongst them, a prophet by the name of Daniel. Here is the emperor. They asked the emperor to pay for the restoration of the cathedral, and he said there is one condition. I want you to change the head of the prophet Daniel and put mine there. Are you with me? Do you think that he was familiar with the book of Daniel, chapter 2, and particularly verse 43? Oh, you bet. Oh, you bet. He was very familiar with that. You know, you remember that house? Not a bad little place. I wouldn't mind retiring like that. It's not going to happen. The woman that was looking after him found him in the morning when he had died during that night. Next to his bed was a chair with an open Bible. It was open. Guess which book of the Bible it was? Daniel. Guess which chapter it was? Reportedly underlined 43. And they shall not cleave one to another. You know, Adolf Hitler did everything wrong, but he did one thing right. He took that one away and he put the head of Daniel back again. That's also an historical fact. There he is. The things that he did do. What do people get in their mind? What do people get in their mind? We had D-Day. It culminated in D-Day. We had D-Day in June, didn't we? 6th of June. And it's a 70 years commemoration. There was a book written by a man of Cornelius Ryan, and he wrote the book and titled it The Longest Day. Now this is really coming home a bit now. Cornelius Ryan, as he wrote the book, and they made a film of it, some of you might have seen it. Cornelius Ryan wrote that book, and when the information kept coming on his desk, he wrote down these words. He said, the miracles of D-Day, it should have never come off. It should have never come off. As a child, I used to play there at the Dunes in Holland, and they had all these bunkers, Fortress Europa, Hitler called it, and he was right. 3-4 feet thick walls. You know, nothing could penetrate that, known to man at the time. And they had them all along the coast. We were not allowed to play there because there was ammunition. So when you're not allowed as a kid, what do? Yes, you climb the fence and that's what you do. You know, you ask sometimes, can't you help that? Where was God? Where is God? Where was he? And I hope you're up for it, I want to tell you about where God was. There he always is. When there is human suffering, he's there. When there's human conflict, he's there. He does not take leave. I want you to see some of the miracles that Cornelius Ryan recorded, and so did others. So did others. Now, let me explain. So you have World War I. It was supposed to be the war of all wars. It was supposed to settle all the wars. It only laid the foundations for a few decades later to have the Second World War. And what a scale it was. What a horrendous. Millions and millions and millions go to their death. What good could have been done for humanity if sanity had prevailed? But it did not prevail, and so there we are. Where was God? Well, God was there. Adolf Hitler had this obsession with Lebensraum, he called it. Room to live, he wanted to create a perfect society, so callously, coldly would eradicate all those that he not considered pure as the human race. The Holocaust, Hashua, which means the debacle, the disaster, that's what it means in Hebrew. There was God. You gotta go back to Verdun. I'm going to show you on a map in a minute where Verdun was. But I want you to see something. The Allied forces that landed in Europe trying to teach Adolf Hitler a lesson, were surprised when they were so soundly resisted, defeated, and driven back until their backs were right against that channel, that tremendously active bit of water, wild water, between England and the continent of Europe. They had no hope of escaping. They were the objects of constant bombardment, artillery, planes. They had no way to fight back. All the equipment of England was right on these beaches, useless, out of petrol, out of ammunition. They hardly could fight back to stay off the German assault. There was only one thing to do. The Admiralty knew they had to pull them off that beach. But you can't get your boats near enough because they'll be destroyed by artillery. The water is too wild to send the boats normally. I checked the weather conditions. They reported on that. Cornelius Ryan mentioned it. There were some 350,000 odd men there on that beachhead, there in northwestern France. The Admiralty had hoped that perhaps they might pull some 30,000 men off that beach. Do you know, they pulled off that beach 335,000 men. How did they do it? Because the water that is always wild, particularly in June, that water that is always wild was as smooth as a baby's bum. And that's smooth. As smooth as this floor, by way of exception. You know, I think of the story in the New Testament when he stood up in the boat and he commanded the wind to be still. I think he did it again, don't you? There was another miracle, and that was the first miracle, and it falls under the category of the miracles there at Dunkirk. There was a second miracle. There is a second miracle that I need to share with you. It's been reported, it's been remarked upon, and it is so interesting. There is a pier, there was one pier at Dunkirk. The Germans knew about it. Constantly with their artillery and their Luftwaffe, they were trying to bomb, destroy the pier, because that's how disembarkation could find place. They knew it, the Allied forces knew it. You know, whilst it was the constant object of that artillery and air attack constantly, not one scratch. No artillery ever landed on that pier. I would say to you, he had his hands over that. And they took this man back, and they played a major role later on, of course, as in the defense of England and the attack, of course, at D-Day. Operation Dynamo ended on the 4th of June. That means that this taking them off the beach. It was fantastic. Now, there is another miracle, number 3. You're interested in this stuff? I love history. Because history explains today. And it fortifies my belief. I can look at it and say, yeah, I can see this. Now, have a look at this. The 3rd miracle. Here, that's Dunkirk, down there. That's where they got them from, back to England. Now, when they had left, Hitler was standing there at Calais, and he could see the white cliffs of Dover, and he knew all he had to do was land. Churchill said they didn't have a single tank to repel them. So Adolf Hitler decided to invade in September. Why September? Well, September is the 1 month that the cold water from the North Sea with the Atlantic Ocean, where they meet here in the narrow pass, which makes it such a wild piece of water, it's the only time when it is relatively calm. That's when people swim across some 40 k's. You can cross it. I've crossed it about 6 times. By ferry, it's quicker. What do you think I am, Superman? Okay. Now, this September, you can go to the museum or the libraries and look up the weather reports. The whole month of September was such a wild month. They had to pull the invasion barges into those little ports all along the coast. And you know what? The only thing they had was an air force. Not a big one, but that air force blew and blasted all those invasion barges from here to Kingdom Come. And Hitler had to postpone. He was going to try in December. Why December? Well, in December, it is marvelous. In December, you have these fogs as thick as a soup, they say. Oh, it's frightening if you ever been. I've been on a trawler once in that time, and you go by the sounds of the horns. You can't see. You just can't see. Radar, of course, is the only way. But you know something? That December, by way of exception, I say again, unknown in human history, that December, there were no fogs. It was clear all the way. And he decided, leave it. And then he took the worst advice that he could ever take from Hermann Göring, and it couldn't happen to a more awful bloke. He took his advice, and Göring said, Herr Hitler, don't worry, mein Führer, we will bomb England into submission. And Hitler decided he would turn around and he would concentrate on the East. And he made the same dreadful mistake that 130 years before was made by Napoleon Bonaparte. It's not the Russians that defeat you. It's the Russian winter. By the time Napoleon got back to the river Berezina, dogged by the Cossacks, he had only a fraction left of his army, and the same thing happened to Hitler. Stupid advice, but I'm glad he gave it, and I'm even more glad. Do you know, if anybody got very close, and I could stand here tonight to give you talks for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of the facts, how close Germany got to this. Adolf Hitler, an insignificant little corporal during World War I. When agitating politically, he was thrown in jail, and he wrote a book that was called Mein Kampf. That means My Struggle. And in that book, he described a 1,000-year empire. Everybody thought he was mad. But I'm putting it to you today, he came that close. The race for the atomic bomb, they were well in front. Now I'm going to put the formula here because I haven't got the time to go into it. Britain, by the time the Americans got pulled in, you remember Pearl Harbor? Pulled them in. Pulled them in. They didn't want to be a part of it, America. England became the unsinkable aircraft carrier from which they could bomb Germany. And one of the main targets was a little place called Panamundi next to the Polish border, where they had brought heavy water from Norway in the production of the hydrogen bomb. He had the V1, which might not have carried it, but the V2 could have. And I can tell you, had Hitler won the race of the atomic bomb, he would have done to any American city what they did do to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Are you with me? That's it. We all would be speaking German, I'm sure. Which is not so bad, but it shouldn't be compulsive. So, I'm just telling you. D-Day could have never been launched. The Atlantic Ocean was far too wide. It could have never been pulled off. Never. Fortress Europe, if England had fallen, would still be in German hands today. And that's how close it came. And he would have broken the prophecy. But it was not in the will of God that he would. There you are. The planned invasion, I just told you the story. The Battle of Britain. You know, when you look at their defense, when you look at their tenacity to survive this, when you look at the capacity, when you look at the pilots, a small group, a small air force, they were flying 24 hours. Some of those young guys, they died so young, but they were fantastic. When Sir Winston Churchill once came back from a bunker where there was the field marshal, what was his name again? No, I'll think of it. He looked at the radar. German bombers coming, wave after wave after wave. Parker was his name. He said, see, I'm not that old yet. He said, Parker, do you have anything in reserves? And Parker said, no, sir. I've thrown in my last. And do you know, when he said that, the two men were standing there, glued at the radar, waiting for the next wave of German bombers that would have never been opposed. But they never came. And as he made his way home in his taxi, he wrote these immortal words which will, I would say, always exist and be remembered for as long as the English language survives. Winston Churchill had a way of saying things. He said, never in the history of human conflict, he said, have so many owed so much to so few. And he was referring to those fighter pilots putting in 24 hours. These boys were so tired. So many of them died. But a wonderful, wonderful, heroic condition. Operation Neptune, of course, is a code name for D-Day. We know what happened. But I love to tell you some of the incredible things that have happened and why it should have never been pulled off. But it was not the will of God that it should fail. Oh, I can tell you stories. It is a miracle. I'm telling you. Maybe another time we can cover this again. They shall not cleave one to another. Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Balkan War taught us. Tribal instincts run deep. They are so deep, so strong. They're still digging for the evidence of the atrocities. Pray for the Ukraine. Watch what is happening. United? Never. Never. And it's not just a matter of religion, it's more. It is much more. It's a terrible thing what's happening there. Why do they have to do it this way? The European Union, you say, they're all one. Listen. The French don't trust the English. The Germans think they're the best. No, we don't think that at all. But I have to ask you a question. Would you trust a Dutchman? Don't answer that. The European Union is only a fiscal decision. And whilst many countries are members, it is a disaster. I know they meant well. I think it's a disaster. It's like a puzzle that never actually quite did fit, and it never was completed. They will not adhere one to another, just as iron doesn't mix with clay. And that is just in the financial area. And so it is, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven, what kings? Where did that stone hit? The divided European nations. Now, we've been there for quite a while. Now, he says, in those days, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. That's interesting. That's eternity. That's eternity. That's the stone without human hands. Remember that? Oops, I went too fast. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people. It shall break in pieces, consume all the other kingdoms. It shall... This is eternity. This is eternity. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, supernatural, that it broke in pieces, and the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, there was only a few years between them. He says, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. 2,500 years ago, we look at it, and I say, amen, he was right. Nobody could deny this. Nobody could. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel. And the king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, revealer of secrets. The seed was sown. It still took some doing before he became a true worshipper to God. Then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many gifts, made him the ruler over the whole province of Babylon, we would say prime minister, and the chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. They didn't have much of a brain anyway. And also Daniel petitioned the king, and this is a good friend, he petitioned a job for his friends as well. That's what you do when you get into politics. Yeah, you look after your friends. But what is interesting is this little statement here. Daniel sat in the gate. Now, if you want to know the significance of the gate, study the book of Ruth. The gates is where the judgment is. We'll talk about that one day. In the Semitic mind, that's very significant. Okay. Now, we're almost here. We're actually there. The statue, and you figured it by now, haven't you? The statue represents a timeline of Earth history. And you're here. You're right there. I put it to you tonight, as we go through the prophecies, I'll put it to you tonight that we are in the nail beds. So close. So close. See, how come that God knows the future? Well, I'll tell you why. He's in control. Absolutely in control.
Why did he let us know through Daniel?
Huh?
Why did he let us know through Daniel?
Oh. Warren, I look at myself, and I was going to do it like this. Let me share you a little secret. I was going to live it up for years, until I get really old, till I get about 50. And then I'm going to become good. Yeah? The trouble is, I got onto the prophecies of Daniel first. And I look at those prophecies, and those prophecies tell me this. There's a God. And you are not him. I am not. There is a God who knows. Who knows. Knows every one of you sitting here. He knows everything about you. There's nothing you could tell him that he didn't know. And he makes known his will. And then he says, I'll give you a good reason to follow my counsel. I'm here. I can give you eternity. When I learned about those prophecies of Daniel, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because God is there already. He's only waiting for you. Are you with me? Good. That's it. He's coming back. Jesus said that he is coming back. Soon. Soon. Next Wednesday. Please. Don't miss the next presentation. I'll give you more evidence, as much as you like, as we go along. We must realize the countdown to that last empire. It's close. Now, can I see a show of hands? How many of you can see that don't make sense tonight? For how many of you does that make sense? I just want to make sure you understand. You've understand the prophecy, you've understand the message, right? Okay. What you do with it is up to you. All we do is share what we know. And I hope that all of you are going to be here and that we continue this amazing journey into the worlds of the prophets, the predictions, and the truth as it comes to us from that wonderful book, the Bible, the Word of God. Would you mind if I have just a very brief prayer and then dismiss you? Would you bow your heads with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you for your presence here tonight, that we may understand and have understood this incredible message of truth, that you are there, always were, always will be. And we pray that we may follow your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for being here.